the time on the airplane. When I saw you I fell in love, and you smiled because you knew. William Shakespeare. Our story begins with a 17-year-old boy named Zach Morgenstern, graced with good looks but not the ability to do anything with them. It's 5:17 am and Zach is currently slouched in an uncomfortable metal seat in the airport waiting room, piano music drifting through his earphones. His fingers, long and calloused from playing the keys too much, fiddle with the wire. Slowly, his eyelids flutter shut, unsurprising given the current time. Sleep has just begun to reach him when a loud noise somewhere between a beep and a bell ringing sounds, startling him back to consciousness. He flinches, eyes flashing open, and looks around. The lounge, which had previously been brimming with people, is almost empty. Last call for Flight 0530 to Vancouver International. All remaining passengers, please prepare to board. A voice blasts from the speakers dotted around the room. Zach leaps up and joins the end of the queue, shuffling forward until it's his turn to show his passport and boarding pass. The bored-looking young woman scans them both, then nods and passes them back. "Have a nice flight," she says, holding his gaze for a moment and then winking. Zach coughs, nods and shrugs all at once. I will, thanks." There are many things that frighten Zach: wasps, roller coasters, indeterminable deep expanses of water people, most of the time, but thankfully air flight is not on this list. He settles into his seat, content, and plugs his earphones back in. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata begins playing, which makes him simultaneously smile and sink further into his seat, exhaustion taking over. Once again Zach shuts his eyes, this time knowing he has hours in which to catch up on some well-needed sleep. Cue our next character: "Alice, excuse me, you're in my seat." The voice that forces Zach from his rest for the second time that hour is stubborn and sharp. He opens his eyes and pauses his music, preparing to commence an argument, and sees her, partially silhouetted by the bright airplane lighting. She's staring down at him, mouth fixed in a tight line. In her hand is a boarding pass bearing the name Alice Panoni. Zach shakes his head. "Actually, this is my seat. I'm rowing D seat 4. I'm rowing D seat 3, so I should be sitting there actually." As it turns out, Zach is in the wrong seat. But he doesn't realize this until they've been arguing for a fair few minutes. "If firing you shouldn't. I should." Back and forth can really be classed as anything other than immature, that is, eventually, he gives in and shifts across to the seat by the window, mumbling that it's whatever, he likes window seats better anyway. Alice sits down triumphantly. With a sigh, Zach hits play on his phone, and music floods through his earphones again. Frustratingly, he's become too worked up to go to sleep. And, even worse, the girl next to him has started prodding at his arm. Zach yanks the earphones out and twists in his seat to face her. "What?" "You need to turn your phone off," Alice tells him. "It's in flight mode." She shakes her head, persistent. "No, it has to be switched off. They announced it." Zach's eyes follow the gesture of Alice's elegant hands to the cabin crew who are currently going through the tedious motions of demonstrating how to inflate a life jacket. He shrugs. "Does it really matter?" "Yes, it does." Alice snaps, so forcefully that Zach actually complies. He makes a show of turning the device off and shoving it in the front pocket of his backpack. "Happy now?" There's no reply. He glances at his fellow passenger and sees that she is in fact not happy at all. Far from it, Alice is staring straight ahead and chewing frantically on her bottom lip. Then Zach realizes that the plane is now moving, picking up speed up until it's thundering down the runway. With a jolt, they lift off and Alice's hands move to the armrests, gripping them so tight that her knuckles turn white. Perhaps it's bad, but Zack can't help but smirk. You don't like flying, then? Alice rigidly shakes her head, seeking out a number. A couple of minutes pass like that as they ascend into the clouds, Zack staring out the window whilst Alice focuses on not passing out. Eventually, the angle of the plane evens off and they're traveling steadily through the air. An announcement from the cabin crew informs the passengers that it is now okay to use electronic devices, as long as they're in flight mode. So Zack does just that, switching on his phone and listening to his music again. By his side, Alice is feigning an interest in the pattern on the back of the chair in front of her whilst her hands still clutch the armrests, though not quite as forcefully as before. But Zack is oblivious, so wrapped up in his music that his fingers have started tapping out the melody against his thigh. Before long he falls asleep, this time not waking for several hours. Alice glances at the boy next to her as he sleeps. His eyelashes, long and dark, brush against his sharp cheekbones. She can't help but notice his lips, chapped and slightly parted. Okay, so she thinks he's gorgeous. But he's also aggravating, the way he refused to move seats for so long when he was clearly in the wrong. Or maybe he's just ignorant. Whatever, Alice doesn't need to spend any more time pondering on his existence. She's infinitely thankful when the air hostess comes trundling down the aisle, pushing the refreshments trolley. Alice raises a hand to grab her attention. A large black coffee, please. The woman sets about getting the coffee and Alice takes it. As she passes across the cash, she's unaware of Zack watching her through blurry, half openness. Anything else? Asks the air hostess, with her customary smile plastered on. I'll take a regular hot chocolate, please, Zack says, and Alice jumps, her eyes darting toward him. I didn't know you were awake, she comments evenly. He shrugs, raking a hand through his messy, slightly curled hair. Alice looks at her lap. They sit in silence for a while, both sipping at their drinks. When Zack stands up and edges past Alice, she stops him. Where are you going? Zack frowns. The toilet. Why does it matter? She sighs, fiddling with the end of the dark braid in her hair. Can you get me another coffee, please? Here's the money. There's a $5 bill pressed into Zack's hand before he can refuse. Instead, he rolls his eyes toward the low ceiling and heads toward the end of the cabin. You see, number one on Alice's list of things she hates is airplane travel. But at the same position on the things she loves list is coffee. Therefore, by keeping herself on a permanent caffeine high, she can just about counteract the worst of the flying phobia. Of course, the cute boy sitting next to her throws off the balance slightly, so she's firmly keeping him out of the equation. Throughout the duration of the flight, Alice drinks a total of 3 black coffees. Zack does a lot of sighing and blocks everything and everyone else out by listening to music, his speciality, really. On the bumpy descent and landing, he watches Alice once again cling to the armrest as though her life depends on it. After a few minutes, the seatbelt light pings off and the plane is full of the sound of everybody unclicking them. During the repetitive announcements by the cabin crew, Zack fumbles around under his seat for his bag. When he looks up, Alice is gone, disappearing into the crowds of passengers exiting the airplane. The time at the bus stop. Alice Panoni is used to the scorching, bright weather of her hometown of Rome, Italy. Despite the fact she's now lived in Canada for over 2 years, she's still yet to become accustomed to the frigid climate over here. As each winter approaches and the ground ices over, Alice still finds herself startled by just how cold it gets. This is what she's thinking as she trudges to the bus stop near her house. Her feet, clad in electric blue Doc Marten boots, splash in semi-frozen puddles of the slush that always follows snow. The bus stop is deserted when Alice reaches it. She stands under the shelter, shivering a little, and waits for her bus. As usual, it's late. Whilst the bus service's failure to deliver a bus on time is annoying to Alice, it's very handy for Rother Morgenstern, who is currently hurrying towards that same bus stop. He's got a navy blue scarf wrapped around his neck and obscuring half his face, but it's still not quite enough to protect him from the bitter January weather. Zack reaches the bus just as its doors are about to close. Then he notices that someone, a girl, has held it open for him. He struggles to catch his breath as he thanks her, his smile hidden by his scarf. She nods and quickly shuffles to a seat as he gathers the ticket fare from his wallet. As it turns out, the only available seat is next to the girl who'd held the door for him. Zack sits down and gets out his history exercise book. Being the master of procrastination he is, he has managed to leave the essay due for first period to the very last minute. Alice glances across at the lap of the boy next door her, smirking when she notices that he's busy scrawling what appears to be homework. She can't help but be amused at the way his handwriting jolts and tilts with every bump and turn in the road. Thankfully, she completed all her assignments due today before visiting her sister at college in Florida. She takes a moment to thank her past self for her initiative and not letting herself end up in a similar situation to the boy beside her. Instead, she gets at her phone. She'd been meaning to call said older sister when she arrived home yesterday but ended up going straight to bed the moment she got home, hit hard by the caffeine crash. Hey. The sound of Alice's sister Katrina's voice always brings a rush of happiness to her. She sounds like home. Hi, Kat, it's me. I know you told me to ring when I got home but I was so tired that I just went to bed and slept for, 16 hours, Alice says, trying to keep her voice low to avoid being the annoying person on public transport who yells down their mobile phone. I can't blame you. How was the flight? Any better than on the way over? Katerina asks in a slow voice. Alice shrugs, despite the fact Kat can't see her. Not as bad. I mean, I wasn't sitting next to the bitchiest old lady ever, which helped. This boy went and got me a couple of coffees when I didn't want to get up, so that was good. Sorry, Bella. I'm trying to pay attention but I'm currently nursing the worst hangover and it would be easier just to speak in Italian. *diaresis che va bene? Alice laughs and continues the conversation in her native language. It seems to be following closely along the lines of the passenger she sat next to as her sister persists to ask whether he was cute, was he a gentleman, etc., to which Alice replies yes, he was cute, but no, he was also extremely infuriating. Eventually she manages to steer the conversation away from herself and towards college life. For some reason, she's found her thoughts drifting to that boy more than once since her return and that is not something she wants to ponder on further. Meanwhile, Zack is furiously scribbling down the conclusion to his essay, blissfully unaware that the girl sitting next to him right now is that same person who has managed to occupy a fair few of his thoughts. In fact, it's pretty much her fault that he's doing his homework now, as opposed to last night. At last he finishes it and shoves it into his bag. Now that his attention isn't focused on his assignment he becomes aware of a one-sided conversation taking place beside him is that Italian? The language strikes at the memory of a voice he'd heard in the early hours of yesterday morning. At the time he'd brushed it off as just some vaguely European accent, but now it all clicks together. The name, the accent and now the language. Alice Panoni, Zack says, thinking out loud as he stands up to get off at his stop. He heads to the front of the bus, almost missing the chance to disembark. He'd been so wrapped up in his thoughts. As he steps out onto the sidewalk below the bus stop he looks through the window to see Alice staring right at him. The bus begins to pull away and he just catches her lips forming the words "Oh my God." The time at Starbucks. A week has passed and Zach and Alice's paths are yet to collide again. That doesn't mean they haven't both had a sneaking thought about the other, every now and then. In fact, Katerina, always more invested in other people's relationships than her own, has demanded constant updates on their situation. She's insistent no matter how many times Alice tells her sister that there is nothing to update on. Alice is wrong, of course. She just doesn't quite realize it yet. Which is why it's handy, or perhaps more than that coincidence maybe. Fate, even, that Alice has decided to visit Starbucks, her favorite place, on the same day that Zach has arranged a study date with his best friend, Bryn. He's already inside chatting to Bryn about everything other than their trigonometry questions. He sips at a chai latte. Zach isn't much of a coffee person, and nods whilst Bryn recalls the gritty details of her recent breakup. She is the coldest bitch on the planet. I can't believe I slept with her, let alone fell in love with her, Bryn says maliciously. Zach frowns. I'm pretty sure you said the same thing 2 months ago, then a week later you were posting those cute coupley photos on Instagram. Thankfully, Zach has just put down his drink because his childhood best friend responds by shoving him in the chest. Despite her height of 5'1", Bryn has some serious strength in her. It takes Zach a considerable amount of skill to prevent himself from toppling off of his chair. Still, he manages to flail around like an idiot for a couple of seconds. After all, it's not Zach if it's not awkward. When he's recovered, he goes to glare at Bryn but doesn't get the chance. She's now wearing this smug little smile and leaning close to him. You see that girl behind you? She says under her breath, trying to act inconspicuously. She's been gazing all dreamily at you for, 5 minutes straight. Zach glances over his shoulder. A red-headed girl is blushing and looking at her book, eyes constantly darting up toward him. He looks back to Bryn. How do you know she's not actually looking at you? Zach, my love, I have told you many times about my impeccable gaydar. I can't believe you wouldn't have faith in me, she says, making Zach raise an eyebrow at her. Besides, I tried making eye contact with her and she smiled like, hey, I'm smiling at you because I'm a nice person. As opposed to smiling like, hey, I'm smiling at you because I want to help you. Zach makes a face and Bryn laughs. Then she looks at her latte and goes back to him. Here's the plan, she begins. What? What plan? The plan for you to score with the cutie over there, Nitwit. You're gonna go up to the stand to get a packet of sugar for my coffee, and you'll make eye contact with her as you head back. Then drop the sugar off here and say hi to her whilst you're standing. Zach nods, processing it. He can see why it would work, and the girl is pretty, and chatting her up might be uncomfortable but it still beats his math homework. So he stands up and heads towards the box of sugar packets, and directly into Alice. Yes, Zach Morgenstern doesn't just knock into Alice Panoni gently. No, he crashes right into her, sending her coffee everywhere and splattering them both. Alice swears loudly, making no attempt to remain cool and collected for the other customers. She looks down at her white crop top, which has now stained the world's ugliest shade of brown. Sorry. I didn't mean to. Alice, Zach says, breathing her name like it's holy. It sort of feels that way in his mouth, even if she's currently staring daggers at him. I can't believe this, Alice sighs as he grabs a bunch of napkins and begins dabbing at her top. When he realizes that he's essentially caressing a stranger's boobs, he stops abruptly. Only they're not strangers, not exactly. Somehow, that makes it worse. Blushing to the tips of his ears and down his neck, Zach apologizes again. I'll buy you another drink. What was that one? I'll get it now. Sorry. Alice pauses before answering, looking at the boy in front of her intently. How is it that she feels like they almost have a history, yet she doesn't even know his name? That was a large Americano, thanks, she replies, voice clipped. Her heart is pounding as though they've just had some intimate moment. He nods and hurriedly goes to the counter, returning within minutes with a steaming paper cup. She takes it from him, still standing in the exact same spot, unsure, as a Starbucks worker cleans up the mess they've made. At last, she smiles. With a breathy laugh, she says, "Well, you've just bought me a coffee and I don't even know your name." He smiles bashfully. It is far too adorable, especially since she's supposedly still seething at the fact he ruined her top. "I'm Zach and you're Alice and I believe we've met before," he says. He smiles then and, of course, it's crooked and gorgeous and the kind of smile they write poems about. Somebody pushes past them and the pair shuffle to the side, out of the way of the other customers but not at a table either. Alice can hear her sister's voice in her head telling her to make the most of this opportunity, and she's about to speak when another girl approaches. Bryn, as Zach addresses her, bounds toward him. "I gotta go," she says, not even glancing towards Alice. Then they hug, and Alice would laugh at their height difference if it wasn't for her shock. "Love you." "Love you more," Zach replies, chuckling. Bryn leaves then and, coffee in hand, Alice follows moments later. Katrina picks up on the first ring. "Hey, I was just talking about you to my roommate, what's up?" "It's Zach," Alice says. She gulps down the final dregs of her coffee then chucks the cup towards the corner of her bedroom. "Who?" "The boy on the plane, then the bus and now apparently Starbucks, too." "Ah, yes." On the other end of the phone Katrina laughs. "The boy you have a crush on but insist you don't, I know the one. I literally bumped into him today and my coffee went everywhere and he bought me another and told me his name and it sounds pretty lame but he was all flustered and cute." Alice can hardly believe these words are coming from her mouth. Seriously, she meets some boy a couple of times and becomes a stereotypical teenage girl who can't stop blathering on about him. "That's good, why'd you sound mad?" "Cat, he has a girlfriend." "The time at the music store?" Alice Panoni is a lot of things, bossy, emotional, and quirky. But one thing she isn't is the kind of person to hold a grudge. For what it's worth, she has decided that Zach is forgiven for not telling her he has a girlfriend. This decision mainly sprang from two nights lying in bed realizing that A, he'd only just told her his name, there was no reason he should have also informed her of his relationship status, and B, when she looks back on their encounters, cringing, she realizes that there wasn't really any flirting happening, anyway. Not that it matters what Alice thinks of Zach, since she's adamant she'll never see him again. Clearly, she's yet to understand that this is something bigger than mere coincidence. Also, her feelings right now are irrelevant since she's attending a party tonight and planning on getting so drunk she can't remember her own name, let alone his. Zach, however, is still puzzled by the entire scene that occurred just the day before yesterday. His game isn't so bad that it literally sends girls running, is it? After Alice had stormed out, he'd gone back to his table, alone and covered in rapidly cooling coffee, to at least get some studying done. The redhead behind him still tried to make eye contact, but neither Zach's head nor heart was in it, so eventually, she gave up and left. Back to the present day, he's currently rearranging a rack of punk CDs in the music store he works at. It's completely deserted, as usual. Honestly, Zach has no idea how it's not closed down already, but the position gives him decent pay and the chance to listen to his music, so he stays. Perhaps because Zach is the only one of the employees with any musical knowledge, The store manager assigns him the task of making playlists to play in the background. Right now it's a slow, soft acoustic song drifting through the overhead speakers. The gentle melody reminds him of a lullaby his mom used to sing for him before bed. Either by instinct or just because he has a horrendous sleeping pattern, Zach grows tired. A glance at the clock on the wall tells him he has another 2 hours left of his shift. He looks to the door, which hasn't opened in at least 20 minutes, then to his seat behind the till. I'll just close my eyes, and give them some rest, but I won't actually fall asleep, Zach tells himself as he sits down and rests his head on the desk, using his arms as a pillow. Within 10 minutes, he's fast asleep and oblivious to the world. It seems that Zach spends a serious amount of time being woken by other people's voices. Still, what are the chances of it happening multiple times by the same girl? Zach? Alice's voice translates to Zach's brain, slightly muffled by his semi-conscious state. Oh, I didn't expect to see you here. He startles, sitting up and looking around frantically through blurry eyes. Finally, they focus on her. Do you wanna buy something? He asks awkwardly. She smiles, laughing a little, and he looks away. He reckons she's like the sun, she shines so brightly that you can't look at her for too long without feeling dazzled. Sure, Alice replies. Zach envies the coolness of her voice, unaware of the amount of effort she's putting in to keep it that even. My friend Rebecca's birthday is coming up, and I know she likes music, so I figured I'd get her a CD or something. Standing up from his chair and stretching out his impossibly long limbs, Zach nods. What kind of music does she like? I'm not sure. She pauses, tentative. What music are you into? Classical mainly, piano, because it's my favorite instrument to play. But I'm gonna take a wild guess at Mozart isn't your friend's number one. It's not exactly hugely popular amongst teenagers. There's so much Alice wants to say right now, but it all boils down to, tell me more, because your passion makes your eyes go all bright and wide and it's really damn cute. Instead, she asks if he likes any more current music. I'd say my favorite band right now is the Arctic Monkeys. No way. I love them. What's your favorite song? Something has shifted, they've gone past customer server dynamics. But, grinning like idiots, they can't quite bring themselves to care. Oh, Zach says, quieter now. I love Alice. Good choice, Alice answers, voice softer than usual. I like that one, too. It feels like when they'd had that moment in Starbucks, that indeterminable thing. Zach bites his bottom lip, so attractive, damn it, then shakes his head and starts walking to the rack where he knows they'll find Arctic Monkeys. Whilst Zach rings up the purchase of AM, Alice chews on her left pinky. As Katrina often reminds her, it's a horrible habit, but one she can't seem to kick. She always seems to catch herself doing it, especially when she's nervous. She's most definitely nervous right now. It's a strange feeling, watching this not just a stranger as he puts the CD in a small plastic bag. She knows that this is the time when one of them should say something that would officially transfer their relationship from stranger to an acquaintance, if not further. But Alice remembers Bryn and how easily they'd said they loved each other, just like that. So she bites her tongue because she has no desire to interfere with their relationship. Although she'll admit she wouldn't be devastated if they were to split up and Zach became on the market, then there's Zach. Awkward, insecure, introverted Zach. He doesn't ask for Alice's number because looks at her. As mentioned previously, Zach recently grew into his striking features but is unsure as to what that means for him. Bye, Zach. Bye, Alice. He watches her leave, just as she departed the airplane, then raced out of Starbucks. He has Arctic monkeys Alice stuck in his head all afternoon.